The first time I truly noticed her, it was, if this slow burn romance touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss more stories of unexpected love and quiet connections. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a moment that changed everything with just a glance or a touch, by accident, or maybe it wasn't? I had been fumbling with the mailbox, wrestling a stubborn envelope that seemed determined to escape my grasp, when a soft voice interrupted my frustration. "Excuse me. I think this is mine." I looked up, and there she was, standing in the narrow hallway outside my apartment door. She was dressed simply, yet effortlessly elegant, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but still drew it. Her hair, a rich chestnut, framed her face in soft waves, and there was a quiet grace in the way she held herself. She was older than me, I realized immediately, maybe early 40s, with a calm confidence in her movements. And yet, behind that poise, I sensed a quiet vulnerability, like a carefully guarded story I wasn't meant to know, yet. I handed her the envelope, our fingers brushing for the briefest moment. It was a touch so slight, yet it lingered in a way that made me suddenly aware of the warmth of her hand. Her palm was soft, and for a heartbeat, her touch felt heavier than it should, like it carried more than the weight of paper. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine, just long enough for a strange, electric awareness to settle between us. Her eyes met mine, and I realized I hadn't just noticed her physically, I was seeing her, really seeing her. There was something in her gaze, a calm curiosity mingled with quiet amusement, and for a moment, it felt like she could see all the little details about me that no one else did. My chest tightened in a way that made me self-conscious, and I quickly averted my eyes, pretending to focus on the envelope. But her eyes followed me, warm and steady, almost coaxing me to look back. She smiled, a small, reserved smile that didn't try to charm me but somehow did. It tugged at a part of me I didn't know existed, an ache for connection I hadn't realized I was craving. Her voice, soft and slightly husky, carried an understated warmth that lingered in my ears even after she stepped back. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral, maybe jasmine, followed her into the hall, subtle yet undeniable, leaving an invisible trace that seemed to hang in the air long after she had walked away. I stayed there for a moment longer, pretending to adjust the envelope in my hands, but in truth, I was trying to steady the quick rhythm of my pulse. Something about her presence had unsettled me in the most unexpected way, not alarm, not desire exactly, but a strange curiosity, a pull towards someone I didn't yet understand. That brief encounter, the accidental touch, the lingering eyes, planted the first seed of something that, in hindsight, I knew would grow quietly but relentlessly between us. And just like that, the widow next door had stepped into my life, not with a dramatic gesture, not with a confession or a declaration, but with the gentlest, most human spark of connection, a hand held too long, a gaze that seemed to linger, and a quiet awareness that she might already be changing everything I thought I knew about my ordinary, predictable days. It happened the next week, entirely by chance, or so I told myself. The sky had darkened suddenly, heavy clouds rolling in over the city like a warning. I had been leaving for a short errand when I saw her struggling at the curb, plastic grocery bags threatening to tear with each gust of wind. She looked up as I approached, and her eyes met mine with that same calm curiosity I had noticed before. "Do you need a hand?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart had picked up an unfamiliar rhythm. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and then, with a faint smile, nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made the sudden chill of the rain feel almost irrelevant. We moved together toward her apartment, under a shared umbrella that felt far too small for the two of us. The fabric pressed lightly against our shoulders as we walked close, the rain pattering softly around us, muffling the sounds of the street. Every time our hands brushed, whether adjusting the umbrella or shifting a bag between us, it sent a quiet jolt through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers would linger just slightly, as if testing the possibility of comfort in closeness. Halfway up the stairwell, one of her bags snagged on the railing. I reached instinctively to steady it, and our hands met again, palm to palm this time. It was a simple gesture, yet I felt the weight of it differently, the warmth of her skin, the brief brush of her wrist against mine, the subtle tension in her fingers that suggested a mixture of trust and hesitation. My own pulse thudded a little louder. She looked up at me, and her gaze held a soft question, silent but profoundly intimate. I smiled back, unsure if she noticed how much that tiny connection had affected me. By the time we reached her door, both of us were damp from the rain, but there was a strange sense of comfort in the shared ordeal. She set the bags down, and our hands met one final time as I passed them to her, lingering just a fraction too long. Her eyes caught mine, and I thought I saw a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, or something more fragile, like a quietly guarded hope. We said our polite goodbyes, but neither of us moved immediately. There was a stillness in the hallway, filled with the quiet sound of rain and the faint scent of her perfume, subtle but familiar now. My chest felt tight, my thoughts scattered, yet I was acutely aware of her presence, the warmth that seemed to cling to the space between us. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a casual encounter, it was a moment that would linger in memory, shaping the way I noticed her, the way I imagined her, and the way I would think of her in the quiet pauses of my own day. Walking back to my apartment, I couldn't stop replaying it, the brush of her hand, the tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips as she smiled. I felt a quiet, almost guilty thrill, knowing that something subtle yet undeniable had begun between us. The widow next door had stepped closer to my world, not with words or declarations, but with a simple shared moment that left me aware of every heartbeat, every fleeting touch, and the growing tension that neither of us could yet name. It was late afternoon when I saw her again, not by chance this time, but in one of those quiet moments that felt almost private, like I had stumbled into a hidden corner of her life. I had returned from a long day, expecting nothing more than the hum of my apartment, when I noticed the soft glow of her balcony light through the slightly open sliding door. She was sitting there, alone, surrounded by a collection of photographs and old letters spread out like a delicate tapestry of memories. Curiosity drew me to linger in the doorway just long enough to catch a glimpse. Her expression was unreadable at first, a mixture of calm and something more fragile, a shadow of nostalgia that flickered across her face. Then she looked up, and her eyes found mine, not with surprise, but with a quiet acceptance, as if she had been waiting for me to notice. I stepped closer, offering a hesitant greeting. I didn't mean to intrude. She shook her head softly, the faintest smile curving her lips. "You're not intruding. Come, if you want." Her invitation was simple, almost casual, but something in it felt profound. I joined her on the balcony, the city's distant sounds softened by the late afternoon haze. The air carried the faint scent of her perfume again, now mingled with the delicate aroma of her tea, steaming gently in a porcelain cup. She handed it to me, our fingers brushing as I accepted it. The touch was fleeting, yet it sent a ripple through me, subtle and insistent. For a long while, we didn't speak. I watched her turn the pages of a photo album, her fingers tracing the images with care. There was a quiet reverence in the way she lingered on each memory, a soft sigh escaping her lips that spoke of love, loss, and the passage of time. Finally, she glanced at me, eyes reflecting a mixture of amusement and vulnerability. "They're old memories," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some I cherish, some I wish I could forget." Her honesty struck me. There was no pretense, no attempt to charm, just a woman allowing a stranger, and maybe herself, to witness her private world. I realized then that my fascination with her went far beyond her beauty. It was the depth beneath her surface, the strength and quiet sorrow that coexisted so gracefully. I reached out instinctively, not touching her face, but resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into my palm, a gesture so small yet so profoundly intimate that it made the world outside the balcony blur into insignificance. Her eyes met mine again, holding a silent question, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the connection forming between us, an unspoken understanding that neither words nor labels could define. We shared a rare, gentle laugh then, over a memory from the album that seemed to lighten the mood just enough. The sound was soft, melodic, and it lingered in the air like a promise of something neither of us yet had the courage to name. In that moment, I realized that the widow next door had begun to occupy a space in my thoughts and in my heart that no casual encounter could ever reach, a space filled with quiet vulnerability, subtle longing, and the tentative hope of something more. It started innocuously, as most meaningful moments do, an ordinary evening that carried an extraordinary weight. She had invited me to help her with a minor task in her apartment, moving a small bookshelf that had become stubbornly stuck in a corner. I had expected a mundane chore, but as soon as I stepped inside, the familiar warmth of her home enveloped me, the soft hum of the radiator, the muted light filtering through sheer curtains, the faint aroma of vanilla and coffee mingling in the air. We worked together in quiet coordination, shifting the shelf with careful, almost synchronized movements. At first, our hands met purely by accident. My fingers brushed against hers as we steadied the bookshelf, and I felt that familiar spark, the subtle warmth, the pressure of her touch lingering slightly longer than necessary. Her hand was firm yet gentle, her movements precise, and the way she guided me with a quiet confidence made my chest tighten in a way that was at once exhilarating and terrifying. When the shelf finally settled into place, I instinctively turned to step back, but her hand remained on my shoulder, just a fraction too long. I could feel the gentle heat radiating from her skin, the soft curve of her wrist resting against mine, the delicate weight of her palm grounding me in the moment. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Our eyes met, and in that suspended silence, I felt an understanding, a recognition of something unspoken but deeply present. There was a subtle charge in the air, almost imperceptible, like the quiet electricity before a storm. Every small gesture, the way she leaned slightly closer to readjust the shelf, the brush of her sleeve against my arm, the tilt of her head as she studied the alignment of the books, carried a tension that neither of us acknowledged out loud. And yet, it was there, undeniable, hovering in the space between us. I found myself noticing every detail, the soft arch of her eyebrows as she concentrated, the faint laugh that escaped when the shelf stubbornly resisted, the way her hair fell naturally over her shoulder as she bent forward. And with each glance, each touch, I felt my own emotions growing heavier, richer, more impossible to ignore. When we finally stepped back to admire our work, she placed her hand lightly on mine, not fully holding it, but enough that our fingers brushed and lingered. Her eyes searched mine, and I realized she was aware of the tension too, the subtle undercurrent that had been building over weeks. There was no rush, no declaration, just the gentle acknowledgement that we were close, closer than we had ever been before, and that the unspoken bond between us was growing stronger with every fleeting touch. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I replayed the moment endlessly. The warmth of her hand on my shoulder, the lingering brush of her fingers against mine, the quiet intensity of her gaze, it all felt like a promise, fragile and potent, that something beautiful was beginning to take shape. The widow next door was no longer just a neighbor, she had become a presence in my life that was impossible to ignore, a quiet pull that drew me into her orbit with every lingering touch and every look held just a second too long. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city hums softly outside while inside, time seems to stretch just enough to notice everything that matters. She had invited me in for coffee, a casual gesture that felt, in hindsight, far from casual. Her living room was softly lit, the warm glow of a single lamp illuminating the bookshelves, the faint glimmer of candlelight reflected in the glass of a photograph frame. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and aged wood, comforting in a way that made me want to stay indefinitely. We sat across from each other on the sofa, the cups warming our hands, and I realized how different this was from the brief encounters in the hallway or the stairwell. Here, there was space, not just physical space, but the kind that allowed vulnerability to surface. Our conversation began lightly, about everyday matters, the rain, the stubborn shelf, trivialities that disguised the gravity of what was happening underneath. Then, gradually, the walls between us softened. She spoke about her past with a quiet candor, her voice carrying memories that were tender, painful, and beautiful all at once. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't just see her outward grace or feel the warmth of her touch, I saw the depth of her life experience, the wisdom carved from joy and sorrow alike. Her eyes, reflective and calm, occasionally flicked to mine, and in those glances, I sensed her weighing her words, testing the waters of trust. I found myself opening up too, sharing pieces of my own life I hadn't spoken aloud in months. There was an almost electric tension in our closeness, not in a dramatic or overt way, but in the gentle, unspoken understanding that we were both allowing ourselves to be seen. I became aware of the subtle ways we touched, fingers brushing as I reached for my cup, the accidental press of her hand against mine as we shifted slightly on the sofa. Each movement carried weight, each glance lingered a little longer than it needed to, and yet we said nothing about it. At one point, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her hand lingering near my shoulder for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The brush of her skin against mine was electric and grounding at the same time, and I realized how much I had been craving these quiet, intimate moments without even knowing it. Neither of us spoke the words that hung in the air, but we didn't need to. The space between us was charged with understanding, a silent confession of emotions too fragile, too new, and too real to voice just yet. For the first time, I understood the depth of my attraction, not just to her beauty or grace, but to her essence, her vulnerabilities, and the honesty with which she carried them. When I left that night, the memory of her eyes, steady, inviting, and quietly intense, followed me down the hallway and into my thoughts. The widow next door had become more than a neighbor, she was a presence that lingered, that pulled me toward her with an undeniable gravity. And in that pull, I felt the first true stirrings of desire, not loud or urgent, but quiet, patient, and profoundly real. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that felt too calm to foreshadow anything extraordinary. I had been walking past her apartment when I heard the faint clatter of something dropping. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but it caught my attention, and I found myself instinctively heading toward her door. She was there, bent slightly, reaching for a book she had dropped near the edge of the porch. The rain had started again, a light drizzle tapping softly against the window panes, and she slipped slightly on the wet surface. My reaction was instantaneous. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around her to steady her before she could even protest. For a moment, the world outside that porch, the rain, the city, the hum of traffic, vanished. I could feel the warmth of her body against mine, the gentle pressure of her hands seeking balance, and the subtle, calming rhythm of her heartbeat pressed lightly against my chest. Her head turned, brushing against my shoulder, and her eyes met mine with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Time seemed to slow. The brush of her hair against my arm, the warmth of her palms on mine, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the cool evening air, it all felt amplified, each detail a vivid thread weaving us closer together. She held my gaze, silently communicating something she could not, or would not, put into words. And in that gaze, I saw the reflection of my own emotions, mirrored and magnified, revealing desires that had been quietly building for weeks. We lingered there, still in the protective hold of that moment, our hands brushing again, fingers intertwining almost by instinct. The simple act of contact, repeated and prolonged, was electric yet tender, a language without words that spoke more truth than conversation ever could. She shifted slightly, resting her head just above my collarbone, and I felt the fragile tremor of hesitation in her body, the tension of a woman balancing vulnerability with dignity, caution with curiosity. Neither of us moved to break the embrace immediately. There was no need. The silence was full, resonant, and profoundly intimate. The storm outside mirrored the quiet intensity between us, raindrops striking the porch like soft applause for this private, fleeting communion. And in that suspended time, I understood the depth of the bond that had been growing between us, the accumulation of fleeting touches, lingering glances, and unspoken confessions that had led to this single, perfect moment. When she finally stepped back, our hands reluctantly separating, the air between us still hummed with something unspoken but undeniable. Her eyes lingered on mine, and I caught the faintest smile, hesitant yet warm, as if acknowledging the gravity of what had just passed. I walked away that evening with my heart pounding, replaying the sensation of her warmth, the subtle contact of our fingers, and the electric intensity of her gaze. The widow next door had moved from presence to impact. That night, I realized she was no longer just a figure in the hallway or a distant curiosity. She had become a force in my life, quiet, compelling, and profoundly affecting. And in that realization, I felt the undeniable truth: some connections, once formed, can never be untangled. The evening was quiet, the city wrapped in the soft hush of twilight. I found myself standing outside her door, hesitant yet compelled, carrying nothing but the warmth of the moments we had shared over the past weeks. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a faint, earthy scent that mingled with the delicate perfume she always seemed to wear. I could hear the low hum of her apartment, the faint clinking of a cup being set on a counter, the soft rustle of fabric, and it pulled me forward, step by cautious step. She opened the door before I could knock. Her expression held that same balance of calm confidence and gentle vulnerability that had drawn me in from the very beginning. When our eyes met, a small, knowing smile appeared on her lips, the kind of smile that didn't need words to communicate warmth, understanding, and an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us. "Come in," she said softly, and I stepped across the threshold, feeling immediately at home despite the lingering electricity in the air. We didn't speak right away. There was no need. The quiet between us was comfortable, familiar, and charged with all the shared glances, touches, and moments that had built this bridge between us. As I turned to leave, she reached for my hand. It was a gesture neither hurried nor hesitant, just deliberate and filled with the weight of everything we hadn't said. Our fingers intertwined, and I felt the warmth of her skin, the gentle steadiness of her grip, and the quiet strength beneath her touch. For a moment, I simply held her hand, feeling the pulse of her life against mine, the rhythm steady and reassuring. Then she stepped closer, her head tilting just slightly as if to rest against my shoulder. I didn't move away. Her presence was soft yet grounding, a gentle insistence that said more than words could. I felt the subtle shift of her weight, the faint scent of her hair brushing against my cheek, and the quiet thrum of her heartbeat echoing the growing awareness in my chest. We lingered there, hands clasped, shoulders touching lightly, letting the silence speak. There was no rush, no grand confession, only the quiet acknowledgement that we had found something rare and true in each other, a connection born of patience, understanding, and the courage to be seen as we were. The months of small touches, lingering glances, and shared vulnerabilities had led to this, a moment of warmth and clarity that felt both fragile and unshakably real. When our hands finally separated, it was gentle and deliberate, neither of us rushing the moment. She gave me one last look, steady and tender, and I realized that this was more than just attraction, it was trust, respect, and the subtle, unspoken promise of something enduring. As I stepped back into the hallway, the world seemed brighter, quieter, more intimate than before. The widow next door had become an essential presence in my life, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through the quiet intimacy we had cultivated, the careful touches, and the understanding that some connections, once formed, linger indefinitely. I walked away that night with a calm certainty: what we had was real, patient, and beautifully human. The tension had dissolved into warmth, the longing into quiet fulfillment, and the unspoken into a mutual understanding that we had crossed the threshold from curiosity into something meaningful, and perhaps, eventually, lasting. I never expected a simple handhold from the widow next door to make my heart race, but the way she looked into my eyes changed everything.